Hi friends, it's the first week back after the holidays for me, and this is one of my favorite weeks of the year because it always feels like a fresh start. During the holiday break, I love to slow down and indulge in all that the holiday season has to offer, but when it comes to a close, there's nothing I enjoy more than getting back on track and into a regular routine. In this week's video, I'm taking you through a week of homemade meals that gets my family and myself back into some normal eating habits by feeding us with nutrient-dense foods that make us feel good. I'm starting off this week's video by replenishing my stock of home-brewed kombucha. About 9 months ago, I challenged myself with making my own kombucha and was rather successful. I will link a video on how I did that if you're interested in going on the same journey. The tea has been fermenting with my SCOBY, which means it's time to do the second fermentation that will allow it to carbonate. To do that, I am using apple cider to not only give my kombucha some flavor, but also to add some sugars that will create carbon dioxide. After all my bottles are filled, I'll add a gallon of freshly brewed black tea that has cooled to room temperature, and I'll add it back into my brewing vessel. Then this will sit for about a month or two until it becomes kombucha again. Moving along to my breakfast prep for this week, I really wanted to switch it up as my family's been a little sick of my egg bakes, so I'm starting by prepping some breakfast sausage. And to do that, I'm taking a roll of ground breakfast sausage, flattening it into a baking sheet, and this will bake at about 400 until it's cooked through. That's usually about 12 minutes for me. For the main star of breakfast this week, I am doing lemon blueberry sheet pan pancakes. I'm starting by following my normal pancake recipe, which I've made plenty of times, but I will leave below in the description box. Essentially, it's 2 cups of flour with 3 tablespoons of sugar, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, and half a teaspoon of baking soda, and then a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. For the wet ingredients, I'm adding 2 eggs, about 1 3/4 cup of milk, one teaspoon of vanilla extract, and 2 tablespoons of avocado oil. You could also use melted butter here as well. To turn these into lemon blueberry pancakes, I'm adding the zest from 1 lemon as well as the juice from that same lemon. I will then fold in about a cup of washed blueberries. I'm using fresh, but you could use frozen as well. When everything is mixed until just combined, I'm going to pour this onto a large baking sheet lined with parchment paper. The parchment paper just makes it so much easier to pull out after it's done baking and cut into squares. This will bake at 350 degrees for about 15 minutes, give or take a few minutes depending on the size of your baking sheet. As that's cooking, I'm going to go ahead and cut my sausage into individual portions. This has been my favorite way of prepping breakfast sausage because it's so efficient and I don't have to babysit my stovetop or make those little patties. It's also cheaper to buy it in this big roll. I'll then store each piece into an airtight container and I'll reheat these in the air fryer each morning. Now that the sheet pan pancakes are done, I can cut them into 12 individual servings. As this was baking, my house just smelled so heavenly and I couldn't help myself but steal a taste, and my goodness, it was so delicious. A nice change up from our normal breakfast routine. I reheated these in my air fryer as well with that sausage, and then I served these with some scrambled eggs each morning to give my family some more protein. We're getting dinner started earlier in the day by making it in the crockpot, and tonight we're having tacos. So to the crockpot, I'm adding 2 pounds of lean ground beef, and to keep this from drying out, I'm going to add a can of tomato sauce and then about a 1/4 cup of taco seasoning. After mixing everything up, this will cook on high for 2 to 3 hours. I'm also prepping some of our taco fixins ahead of time, and I'm using this new guacamole recipe from Laura Leah's Balanced Cookbook. This recipe is going to lighten up our guac by adding a blend of green peas and avocado. And if you're skeptical, I understand. But if you are like me who loves to put down some guac, this is a great variation that not only packs extra nutrients, but it's a little bit lighter in calories. Another great thing about this recipe is that everything goes into the food processor to blend it all and chop it together. To the food processor, I'm adding 1.5 avocados, 1 whole shallot, and the recipe called for 1 jalapeno seeded and diced, but I only used half just because my kids were going to eat it and I didn't want it to be too spicy, and then the juice from 1 lime. I added a teaspoon of cumin and a full teaspoon of salt, then a pinch of pepper. We don't want to forget our secret ingredient here, and we're using a cup of peas. After blending it up, this is how it looked. And of course, I had to steal a taste. And I have to tell you, I was so pleasantly surprised with the flavor of this. I had to stop myself from eating the whole thing right then. For our next topping, I'm just making a homemade pico, and I chopped up about 3 Roma tomatoes. And then I'll add the juice of 1 lime, about a 1/4 cup of red onion, and just a small handful of cilantro. I'll top that up with about a teaspoon of salt before mixing it all up. and I'll put that in the fridge to kind of marinate until it's ready to use. About a half hour before it's time for dinner, I started making my corn tortillas. I'm adding a cup of masa harina, a teaspoon of salt, and then some water. And then I'll just mix this up with my hand until I divide it into individual portions. Now, I am not an expert in tortilla making, and if anybody is watching here that is and knows the secret, please let me know, because mine always tend to be a little bit drier than I like. You'll see here as I go and press my dough, I can get it nice and thin thanks to my tortilla press. However, I go to put it in the frying pan, mine just has this habit of tearing like this. Even though this happens, I really like the flavor of homemade compared to the store-bought corn tortillas, so I still continue the process of making them at home. Mine just happen not to be as pretty. These tacos were so good, and I just loved this lighter guacamole recipe. It will definitely be a repeat in our house. The next day, I prepped some bread for the week, and if you're looking to start making yeasted bread at home, but you're very busy, I highly recommend getting a bread machine, because as long as you have 5 minutes to prep the ingredients, then the bread machine will do all the work. I personally like to put all of my bread through dough mode, and then I'll shape it myself, which is what we are doing here. So I had a full recipe that I divided into 2 loaves, and for the first one, we're just making it into a regular sandwich loaf. For our second loaf, my daughter requested a cinnamon raisin bread, so I'm pulling out the bread to flatten it out. I just don't want to press too hard and lose some of those air bubbles. And then without measuring, I'm just adding brown sugar until it covers the dough. Finally, we will top it off with some raisins before tightly rolling it up and placing it into the loaf pan. These loaves will then rest for about 45 minutes until they have risen just about to the top of the pan. These loaves turned out great. I just wish I had remembered to poke the tops with a fork before they started their second rise. That way these swirls wouldn't have had so much space in between them. Getting started on dinner tonight, this was actually such a family favorite. It was a new recipe and it's a healthier take on kind of a Southern style dinner. We are doing garlic quinoa grits, and again, I am following the balanced cookbook for this recipe. To start, I'm adding about 2 tablespoons of butter and 6 teaspoons of garlic, as well as 1 cup of rinsed quinoa. And I'm just going to give that a good stir until it's fragrant. After that's been cooking for just a little bit, I'm adding 2 cups of chicken stock and then salt and pepper. I'll cover this and let it simmer for 22 minutes until most of that moisture is absorbed. For our protein source, I'm making barbecue shrimp, and to do that, I'm just boiling some frozen shrimp in a pot. After boiling for about 5 minutes, I will strain those and then add my barbecue sauce. To finish off these quinoa grits, I'll add about a cup of full-fat coconut milk. This is going to make them super creamy. I'm also adding a half cup of grated Parmesan and about 2 more tablespoons of butter. This whole dinner was just packed full of flavor, and it was so simple to make. For our last meal, I'm making my take on a chicken bacon ranch wrap, and I'm starting by finely slicing the chicken breast. I'm seasoning the chicken heavily with salt and pepper and paprika. I'll then throw this into a frying pan and just cook them for about 7 minutes until each piece is cooked through. While the chicken is cooking, I'm prepping the wraps. I'll be adding a slice of cheese as well as some freshly cooked turkey bacon from the oven. When that chicken is done, I portioned it out and then I added some homemade mayo that I turned into a ranch dressing. I was a little short on time here, but I wish I could have cut up some veggies. I think lettuce and red onion and tomato would have been a nice touch, but it just wasn't happening today. I'll then fold these up before serving up with some sliced apples. As this week comes to a close, this is exactly why I love easing back into our routines after the holidays. Nothing extreme, nothing perfect, just simple, nourishing meals that help our family feel grounded again. Cooking at home doesn't have to look fancy or flawless, it just has to work for your season of life. Some days it's homemade bread and fermented drinks, and other days it's quick wraps and fruit on the side, and that's okay. If this video inspired you in any small way to step back into your kitchen, try one new recipe, or prep just one meal ahead of time, then that's a win. Those little consistent choices add up over time. Thank you so much for spending this week with me. I'd love to hear what meals you reset with after the holidays, and I'll see you in the next one.